Today, we're going to talk about ISTQB certification. So this is really a deep dive in terms of certifications. We're going to cover basically everything from beginning to end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So first off, we're going to talk a little bit about the ISTQB test and exam, like what's covered, what's involved, what kind of paths, options that you can take from that perspective. We're going to look at the various levels within the ISTQB so that you'll have more and better information about that. In addition, we'll discuss the exam, we'll discuss the cost. I also have some steps and tricks and tips that you can do in order to really pass it the first time. And then me as a hiring manager, because I've got so many years of experience, I'll give you some hiring tips as it relates to getting your next job within testing. So really, one of the things that really helps to have some sort of standard or ISTQB certification is that we basically are talking the same language, right? So if you talk about a test plan, a test case, a defect, we are all talking the same thing because we all have the base understanding. And this really helps to make sure that the organization is really standardized, that things mean the same thing. And it also helps to onboard somebody because you really know if they have the ISTQB certification, then they have some of these basic glossary, basic terms covered from that perspective. So the other thing that the ISTQB certification is, it's not tied to a specific tool. So you may hear certifications for UiPath, for example, like this is vendor neutral. So there's no tool, there's no methodology, there's no approach tied to any entity. In addition to that, the ISTQB is nonprofit. They're not really designed to make money or anything like that. So it's neutral really from that perspective. And one of the things about the ISTQB certification is that over 1 million people are certified, and it's across many different countries. So I am certified at various levels and different things, and we'll talk about that. It's also a very recognized credential. So if I see that on a resume, then I know that this person has put forth time and effort in order to get that certification. So let's dive into who should actually get certified. So there's various reasons why you get certified. So if you're a new or aspiring tester, you may want to learn about what testing is and the terms and tools, etc., and really the fundamentals. And so the ISTQB is a natural path in order to get your journey started. So that's a really good way to do it. In addition to that, if you're moving from dev, support, or BA, but you want to potentially look at switching careers, then an ISTQB certification can help you gain that knowledge and build confidence within the testing space. So it's a great way on how to do that. In addition to that, there's a more advanced certification. So you can move into lead level roles, into manager level roles. And so these certifications really help you gain that knowledge and experience so that you can be able to lead and manage people from that perspective. In addition, there are certain regulated industries, for example, finance, healthcare, automotive, and government, that really require you to have these certifications because there's additional rules around compliance and different things like that. So that's another reason why some people or individuals, especially in these areas, may choose to get the certification. So one common misconception or myth is that ISTQB is a ladder. Now, while there are certain components that you have to have in terms of prerequisites, it's not a strict ladder. So you can take one thing, do a little bit over here. Then as long as you've got the CTFL foundation level at the bottom, then you can go into other areas and move up. So it's really important to understand the structure, because if you don't understand it, you may pay for exams that you really don't need. So let's go ahead and take care of that. We'll discuss this in detail so that you're not confused or have any questions as we dive more into this. So the foundation level is called CTFL, and currently the foundation is level 4, and it is really the entry point. So this is the bottom tier. It's basically required for anything else above that you decide to take. So once you take the foundation, then you can either go into advanced things like automation, different areas, or you can specialize. So you can specialize in AI, for example, security, DevOps. So these kind of run in parallel. So you don't necessarily stack them. Now, the expert level is more stacked. So, for example, if you wanted to do an advanced test manager certification after you got your foundation, and then you wanted to do an expert test management, then that is stacked, right? So, the only difference between the foundation, advanced, and the expert is that the expert is only valid for 7 years. So after those 7 years, then you need to get that expert certification renewed. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. Now, these streams run through every level. So you basically have your core level. So that's the general testing knowledge that applies everywhere. So that's the foundation we kind of saw in the previous slide. Then on top of that, you go into more advanced levels. Now, in addition to the core, then, for example, most of us are using Agile in some form or fashion. The Agile certification, while it's in existence, I actually have that Agile certification. It does retire in 2027. So it's important that you understand from these certifications. Newer ones are going to be added, older ones are going to be retired, but it's always important that you understand that and keep up with what's going on within the ISTQB certification. Then we have the more specialized roles, right? These will be the AI, the security, the performance, the mobile, automation, DevOps. So these are special functions within testing. And so depending on what your interests are, for example, it's probably a really good idea. We all do the AI one because that one's here to stay. If you have company work that has mobile application, then you may want to get that. If you want to specialize in automation or DevOps, then you want to focus in those areas. So depending on what you're doing, depending on where your career is either at currently or where you want to go, that'll determine which specialized certifications that you go after. So the CTFL is basically where everybody starts. We all start at the same point. We all had to take the same foundation test. It is for those new testers or those testers who have maybe been in it for a few years. When I got my CTFL, for example, I was in testing for a few years so that I kind of knew what was going on from a job standpoint. And then that makes it easier to initially pass that certification versus just not knowing anything and having to start from scratch. So the CTFL exam covers basically the fundamentals, right? The testing process. How do you design different things? So design test cases, test plans. It also talks about different tooling and some tooling basics. And there's really no prerequisite for this. So this one, once you pass it, you always have it. It's valid for life. And this will be the foundation of ISTQB. So I don't see it ever going away from that perspective. So once you have it, you always have it. and you're good to go from that perspective. Now, one thing to kind of keep in mind is about 1 in 4 people fail this exam. So you want to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. And we'll cover some of these items that I've really learned as a part of taking these exams now multiple times. So obviously, the more prepared you are, the better you're going to do from that perspective. And there's things that you can do to avoid these reasons. And there are specific things that are going to trip people up. So we will talk about those here in a few minutes. Now, in order to pass the CTFL exam, you need 26 out of 40. So that's 65%. So the good thing is there's room for failure, right? I can't remember what I got when I passed mine, but I definitely had some failures there. It's going to be 40 questions. You're going to have 60 minutes. It's going to be multiple choice, and you can't use any books or any material. So there's a few different ways you can do that. Anybody can take it. It used to be that you had to go to some proctor site, but now you're able to kind of take it from home, or you can go to a test center, whatever you feel convenient. So the CTFL, as we talked about, doesn't expire, doesn't require recertification. So once you get it, you've got it and you're good to go. So the costs kind of vary. So because I'm in the US, I go through the ISTQB, and the costs vary by, I think, the different exam. And in a lot of other countries, it's a lot cheaper, but there is cost involved. So make sure that you plan for that. Some employers will pay for that. Other employers won't, but make sure that you check with your manager and see if that's something that they're willing to cover. Sometimes you have to sign something saying that I'll be here for X amount of years. Otherwise, I'll have to pay back the cost. But in general, the cost is fairly minimal, and it's a very expensive certification from that perspective. And the thing to keep in mind about the CTFL, and here's one tip, is that chapters 4 and 5 basically have the most weight, and these are the ones where the hardest questions are going to come. So if you're able to do chapters 4 and 5, make sure you focus on those a lot so that you do well in the exam. Now, let's dive into a bit deeper. So once you have the CTFL and a few years of experience, then you want to probably take some advanced certifications. Now, remember, you have to have CTFL in order to get these certifications. And you're probably going to need to spend somewhere between 80 and 150 hours studying these, probably less hours if you have relevant experience within those areas, and more hours if you don't have as much experience. So, for example, me as a test manager, I waited several years before I went to the advanced test manager exam, and I didn't have to study quite as much. I just had to brush up on a few things, and then I was able to take the test and then pass. And in addition to that is once you've done the CTFL, you kind of know what to expect. So there's not any real surprises. So then taking some of the other tests, the advanced and then the expert levels are easier because you've done it a few times, you know what to expect, and it's not a big deal. Now, the exam styles are 45 questions and 120 minutes. So the questions are a bit longer. They're harder questions. You have the 65% again to pass it, but it does vary by module. So make sure that you're aware of that from that perspective. So if you want to move into leadership, and this is something that I've recommended to people in the past, if you're a QA lead or you're thinking about becoming a manager to lead people, this is one that I really encourage my leads to take to see if they wanted to either become a lead or a test manager. In this test manager certification, You'll learn how to plan, estimate, you'll monitor a testing effort. As we all know, risk-based testing is super important. So you'll get better information and knowledge about how to apply risk-based testing techniques and manage risk, and tell your team how to do that. You also will learn more about leading a team, reporting to stakeholders. Reports are super important. In addition to that, how do you own a test strategy, and what process improvements do you make as a part of that? This credential really helps to back up either what you want to do or what you're planning to do. And so once you have this test manager certification, it definitely adds credibility. And this is definitely a harder exam. It's not as easy as some of the other ones. And so you really have to study and make sure you understand these practical principles so that you can then apply it in a day-to-day job when that opportunity presents itself. Certifications require homework, so that's something that you kind of keep in mind. And then from a perspective, tips are really important. It's important to know and to be able to study and learn the material. But if you take some of these tips, apply the techniques, then you'll be able to pass the test and the questions. And then once you're able to kind of do that, then you either get hired or you get promoted or you get a new opportunity later on. So just kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. Now, there's two different tests as it relates to an analyst. There's the test analyst certification. So this is a business-facing analyst. You need to have experience or learn about deep test design, basically analysis from requirements. They talk about equivalence partitioning, decision tables, experience best techniques, and this one is best for QA engineers who write and run a lot of tests. So version 4.0 is out right now. It's a 45 question test, and it lasts for 2 hours from that perspective. Now, keep in mind the test length is, in this example, is 120 minutes. But if you are able to answer those 45 questions before, then you're done from that perspective. Now, a more technical certification is the technical test analyst. So this is a person who is basically involved. They may be looking at code. So this may apply more for white box testing techniques, static analysis, and non-functional testing like performance, security, and reliability. So this is more of an engineering code base than the test analyst. So if you want to do, for example, performance, you would take this technical test analyst, and then you would take the specialized performance certification. So that would be your path as it relates to those certifications. Now, as we all know, there's a lot of activity and really a lot of jobs in automation. So they do have a test automation engineering certification. So this certification will allow you to know and understand principles related to designing, building, and maintaining automation solutions. So in addition to just the scripts themselves, you need to be able to understand architecture and really understand those foundational principles. So not only can you leverage it, but you can also teach somebody else. In addition to that, there's the advanced agile tester. So most of us are in agile, again, as I've mentioned, in some form or fashion. But testing in agile, this certification will help you to have more in-depth knowledge and understanding. It will replace the old Foundation Agile add-on, which does retire. So this is the newer version of that. So you would have your CTFL Foundation, and then you would get your Advanced Agile Tester certification on top of that. Now, let's make sure you're paying close attention, and I really hope you're still with me because The best part of the information comes later in the presentation. So just kind of keep that in mind. So these two are the ones that are brand new. They didn't exist 18 months ago. And these are the ones, if you had your foundation, that I recommend getting in 2026. And those are going to be basically the ones in green. So your AI testing, CT, Gen AI. And then in addition to that, there's a new one as it relates to DevOps, which is your CT QDO. So if you have it, if you got your foundation, I recommend that you probably do one of these three. Certainly the AI testing one, to me, that one's a must have and no brainer. Now, we talked a little bit about performance. So you see there's a specialized one there. In addition to that, you have a security. There are people that get the security certifications. We all know how important security is. In addition to that, there's the mobile app certification. If you want to continue on the automation path, then you would have your automation strategy. Some people do a lot around business and user acceptance testing. So there's an acceptance testing certification for that. And then usability is super important as well. And so there's the specialized certification as it relates to usability testing. We covered this just a minute ago, but to me, the AI certs are the ones that are most relevant. And everybody's working to figure out how AI works. So I think it would be a natural progression to get, especially the first one, to learn more about how to testing AI and machine learning. I actually don't have this certification yet, but this is the next one I'm going to get. And then in addition to that, if you've got different generative AI tools, then you can leverage the Gen AI certification. And we all know how important prompting is and things of that nature. And a lot of these tools like UiPath has some generative AI embedded, and different tools like Postman as well have some AI capabilities. So I think these two certifications would be really good to have, and it would really be impressive for a hiring manager to see, especially since these certifications just really came out this year. Now, from an expert level, I believe I went ahead and got my test management certification. And this really touches on more strategic leadership, how to manage a team, more in-depth information around testing process, testing across the organization. So this is the one that I actually need to check, see when I got mine last, to see when it needs to be renewed. In addition to that, there's another one called Improving the Test Process. So you're basically assessing the current process and improving how the organization tests. And it also has assessor and process improvement tracks. So that is another one that's on the top tier, valid for 7 years from that perspective. Now, as it relates to basically registering and taking the test, these exams are run by ISTQB formally, but there's some different providers. So if you're in the US, you want to get connected with the ISTQB, and that's really where your certification comes through. If you're in the UK, BCS does that. Globally, you can get in touch with ISQL and Bright Test, and then Pearson View Centers. And I think that's where I took one of mine, was in a Pearson Center from that perspective. So again, you can either take it online, which is now super convenient, or you can go to a physical location, depending on which options the provider has. The foundation is $200 to $250 in the US. Additional modules cost a little bit more, but it's not as expensive as maybe some of the more other certifications, so it's really quite reasonable from that perspective. So we've already talked about this, but the foundation, the advanced, and the specialized are valid for life. And then the expert expires every 7 years. Now, here's a little bit more detail around which areas and which certifications should you get. So if you're brand new to testing, you definitely want to get the foundation, and that's the one that basically everybody has to have. Once you've been in testing for a little while and a few years in, then you want to look at some of the more advanced. So, for example, if you're in automation, you would look at the CTAL, TAE, and you would pick that up. In addition to that, you may want to pick up the Agile certification. I know this one is the one that expires, but you want to take the other one that will continue on. And if you want to take a lead or manager role, you want to take the test manager. And we've talked about getting the CTAI or the Gen AI. And these are the ones that are obviously most in demand from that perspective. Now, here's some of the tricks in terms of how to pass it on the first try. So one thing to keep in mind is obviously the syllabus has all of the information. Depending on which one you're taking, each one has its own syllabus. Make sure to pay attention to the version that you're taking. So always look at the latest one to make sure that's the right one, because the syllabus does change from version to version. Now, the glossary is super important. ISTQB is focused on having precise terms. And so the terms, make sure that you study extensively the terms so that when you have a question, you know exactly what they're talking about and you can answer accordingly. I can't emphasize that enough. Make sure you understand the glossary. In addition to that, you're going to have many sample tests and practice exams. So make sure that you are taking multiple practice exams and also make sure that those are timed. So you want to make sure that you're completing those within the right time. In addition to that, I recommend that you try to have not only 65, but go up to 75 and make sure you're consistently able to get that score before you take the exam. And then in addition to that, just kind of keep in mind, depending on which test you're taking, you roughly have a minute to a minute and a half to answer the question. And then the other key is to make sure that you're looking at the verbs, best, first, except, for example, read those twice. Make sure that you understand what they're looking for. So remember, the pass rate is around 74% the first time. Focus on chapters 4 and 5. And if you can do that, then you'll be in good shape from that perspective. Now, also, I want to be realistic about this because a lot of people say the ISTQB certifications, it's just not worth getting a certification in testing. But I believe that the certifications are important and valid, but you have to make sure that you're getting the right certification, because if you get a certification, for example, in performance testing, but you never do anything in performance, then it doesn't make sense that you went and got that certification, right? So just kind of keep that in mind, figure out which ones you want to get, which ones apply for your job. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer it. Your manager or another senior person would also be able to help you from your team perspective if you had questions around which certification to get. Now, the reason why I say certifications are worth it is it does help early career testers. It also helps people that are switching between careers. It helps those in regulated environments. It also helps consultants as well. And then ISTQB, for example, in India, Germany, and some of these other countries. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, if you've been doing testing and, for example, you're in automation it may not be as ideal in certain situations as others, right? But just make sure that it's relevant to you and it applies to you. But for me, even if I see, for example, you're not in performance, you have a performance certification, it proves to me that you want to learn something new, newer technology, and you have to give somebody credit for wanting to have that discipline and that desire to learn something new. So I still think there's value there. Now, from a hiring manager perspective, certainly when I look at resumes and I'm interviewing people for jobs or I'm considering somebody, the certification helps get your resume attention for a hiring manager like me. It helps to kind of get you in the door, right? But once you kind of get in the door, once you get the job or once you get the promotion, then you kind of have to prove yourself, obviously. But it at least to me, it helps you get the interview. Whereas if you didn't have that certification and I wasn't looking for that, then I may have passed you up. So it's your job. Once you get the interview, it's your job to kind of prove yourself. But an ISTQB is a great thing. It often is a conversation starter in the interview. I usually will ask questions around that process. So it is a huge plus from my perspective, and I'll highly recommend it. In addition to that, here's a few other tips and tricks to kind of get your resume or just general job scene, right? You want to try to get that interview. You want to make sure that your resume has the exact name. So ISTQB, CTFL in your summary and certifications. You want to make sure that is in there because these ATS systems are looking for those keywords. So make sure that is put in there. In addition to that, I think this is a pretty interesting one here. You can say CTFL-certified, so that basically reinforces it. It's important also to kind of reorder these for each job. So, example, if you're applying for an AI role, you want to put the CTAI certification first and not at the bottom. And then one other thing that I've seen other people do is in your headline, you can put the ISTQB certifications in there so that the recruiters find you and kind of search on those terms if they're looking for a certification, for example. Now, the ISTQB certification, for example, helps to take from the interview into the offer, right? So it helps you from a few standpoints, at least in my mind. It helps you to talk the same language, right? Test planning, test design, test management, all the same terms, risk-based testing, right? And in addition to that, you need to take that and be able to apply it in the interview, right? If I'm asking you as a hiring manager around boundary test, you can basically take your knowledge and give me an example of a boundary test or a decision table. And that really helps to kind of steer the conversation. Keep in mind as well, it's important to get certifications, but you have, if you have all the ISTQB certifications, then and no real practical knowledge, then that's going to raise a question for me, right? So I want to make sure that not only do you have your certifications, but you had the experience to kind of go along that. Another thing to keep in mind is make sure that when you say you have a certification, that you actually have a certification. Don't put it on your resume because I can go to the ISTQB site and I can get information on you specifically to know which certifications you've completed and which years did you complete the certifications. So just kind of keep that in mind from that perspective. Very important to make sure that you're not fibbing on your resume, because they do background checks are done. And if you do great on the interview, but you're inflating and saying you have a cert when you really don't, then you're not going to get hired, and that'll cause you a lot of problems. Now, the bottom line is you want to get your certification. You want to start with a CTFL. That's the foundation. And then you want to specialize, right? So we've talked about AI, performance, test management. So make sure that you're getting the foundation. These certifications help open the door. Now you apply it with hands-on work, and the hiring managers basically love the combination, and I really do as well. And so that's really the bottom line from that perspective. I hope that you've enjoyed this discussion, this deeper dive on ISTQB certifications. I have a lot more content out on the QA Revolution channel, so make sure that you like and subscribe. There's different areas that I really try to focus on: software testing, basically the fundamentals, talking about test strategy. I also have recently started talking about Claude and AI and the different tools as it relates to AI and testing. So there's some newer content out there as it relates to that. I also do a lot around careers, certifications. We're talking about that. Do a lot of different videos on interviews and getting hired. And so I like to explain a lot of that, and hopefully I've done that in today's videos. And then from a tools perspective, I do some deeper dives into tools as well. I try to be honest about the information that I'm publishing. And so I hope that you've enjoyed this video. There's going to be more videos to come, especially around certifications. So just keep an eye out for that. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.